Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about emotional eating. And when we at the Simsman Center meet cancer patients, it is at a time of great emotional challenge. A diagnosis of cancer changes your life, as I'm sure all of you are aware. So what we're going to do tonight, this evening, is talk a little bit about how integrative oncology is a balance between the mind, the body, and the spirit, and how eating really does improve both the mind, body, and spirit. And we can look at that a little bit at that one at a time. On my way home a few weeks ago, I heard the director of the movie that has won Best Animated Feature Film, a Grammy Award, and also the Academy Award this year, and it's called Inside Out. How many of you may have seen that movie? Oh, great. Well, those of you who haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And the director was explaining how he made the film and really wanted to talk about the film because of a time that had happened in his life, where as a child in middle school, his parents had moved across the country and he had to go in the middle of the year. And it was a time of great trauma and upset. And so they came up with these ideas of the 5 common emotions: joy, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust. And I thought it was relevant because when you have a diagnosis of cancer, it also is a traumatic event and it turns your life upside down. So this is sadness up here. And also I wanted to introduce the concept of a mood as against emotions. So emotions are things that we feel and they pass, but moods are a little bit more prolonged. And we have one way to support the center. We have a small boutique on the first floor of the 200 building called Reflections. And in that boutique, we sell some scarves and wigs and things like that. But also we have a few inspirational things. And we have this little book called I Want to Be Calm, which I can't recommend enough. And in that book, there is this self-help mood map. And the idea being that if you have a lot of energy and you're feeling maybe a negative energy, you might want to balance it out by looking for something in this calmer, lower energy place. So it's being used for people who have some issues with moods because it helps them identify for themselves where they are in the moment and where they're feeling. So I recommend that if you have a moment to look at it, I can also pass this around afterwards, but it's a really lovely little book. So eating is more than just eating food. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight is something very exciting that's going on in the scientific research world. What we're learning about is a new field called the microbiome. And I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but you've probably all heard about probiotics, because that's very much a sort of buzzword out there. But in the past, we thought that food was simply protein, fat, carbohydrates, and alcohol providing these amount of energy. But now we're learning that actually the microbiome not only affects the diet, but also emotional well-being. And this is an area of a lot of research that's going on, and we will learn more about that as time goes on. We can also think about food and nourishment in a broader sense, because when we eat, we're actually thinking about our whole well-being and going back to this balance here with health in the middle. One of the questions we ask in our intake form is, what type of eater are you? And it's so interesting the way people answer that. Some people, just don't answer. And then some people will write a whole paragraph about what they are and what they aren't. And it's just a really good way to start to talk about nutrition in general. This is a recent summary of a report about weight management. And the reason I'm showing you this is because you can see that for consumers who are trying to lose weight, many people choose comfort foods. They may eat because of boredom or depression, or they may be stressed. So I just thought that this was an interesting way of summarizing that. And we know that stress is a major issue for cancer patients. This was a summary that was done by the cancer support community, published in the Wall Street Journal, and it showed that 9 out of 10 cancer patients found that eating and nutrition was a source of stress. And even though they didn't describe it here, my sense of that is that it's probably not so much the patient themselves, but the well-meaning and well-intended loved ones and colleagues who want to tell you what they think you should be doing. Does that resonate with anybody here? Because I hear that a lot. So some people, we're all different. We're all unique in how we approach food. Some people eat to live, and some people live to eat. Maybe you call them foodies. They love it. They love the TV shows where you can watch all the food being prepared. And also, you know, within this context, there are people who are looking more at the spiritual aspect or the physical or even the mental aspects. But one of the reasons that I'm talking about identifying where you are and identifying the way you approach food is that if something feels out of balance, maybe then you can look at it from those perspectives, which is maybe more out of balance for me. This is fear, one of the other characters. And when we look at stress, the stress of a diagnosis, the stress of going through all these new terms, learning new languages, having all of this happen for you, it can sometimes trigger old, disordered eating patterns. We can talk about a continuum from disordered eating to eating disorders, but I'm not going to talk about eating disorders tonight, except to say that when people binge eat, the difference is that if they're distressed by it rather than just overeating, like at Thanksgiving, maybe everybody overeats, but they don't feel that there's something wrong. But some people who overeat and there's something wrong, then we recommend that they reach out to somebody like myself who can help them. And after 9/11, which again was a very traumatic event for the whole nation, of course, there is an interesting finding that, first of all, I wanted to note that the New York City Department reported on how people react to traumatic events. And one of the behaviors is eating less or overeating. So it isn't something, you know, it is something that's very commonly experienced when we're going through a traumatic experience. And it was also interesting that in a later newspaper article, stuff like macaroni and cheese, fried chicken, stuff that is not going to challenge you at all after a time when you're really feeling emotionally challenged. You feel like someone's going to take care of you, like your mom. And I think that it explains and understands why we reach for comfort foods. So now I want to talk a little bit about what happens when you're not just reaching for comfort foods, but you're actually craving a food, what's going on there. And one of the things that we've been learning about the brain is using functional MRIs. And functional MRIs are identifying a lot more about the complexity of different brain activities, the brain reward activation center, with things that will trigger it and won't. And what I also thought was interesting was in 1890 was when there was a lot of discussion of alcoholism and inebriation. I think it's a journal of inebriation, which is kind of an interesting thing. That they actually talked about addiction and used dependence on chocolate as one example of how people became dependent on substances that made them feel better. So taste and pleasure are very closely generated and together. I'd like to thank Steve Witherly, who's a colleague of mine from way back in the School of Public Health, for some of the background on this. He is an expert in the food industry on taste. So there's different types of receptors, and Dr. Barbara Rolls, who's written an interesting book called Volumetrics, talking about how we feel full with different volumes of foods. She talks a lot about the thrilling pleasure and the mouthfeel of different foods. And there is what they call a sweet spot of salt, sugar, and fat, which the food industry, people like Oreo cookie makers, are looking for that sweet spot. In the food industry, what they actually use are what are called blind taste panels. And so when you have something that's a new food that's being put out by one of these larger food companies, what they do is they get people to come in a cool, dark room, and they hand them a little cup of a different food or liquid, and then they have to rate it on a scale of 1 to 9, what they think of these different things. And smell and pleasure and taste are all interconnected. And of course, this is relevant, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in terms of cancer treatments, because unfortunately, some of the pleasure goes out of eating because taste and smell are affected. What is different between us and dogs, for example, who have 10 times as many receptors for odors, is that we actually have many, many more connections between it. So that when we smell or taste something, it triggers memories. It's very complex for us. And maybe with dogs too, but we can't talk to them about it. But so that's a little bit of an overview on taste and pleasure and food and why we like that. But of course, you're here because this is a cancer patient focused evening, and at our center we want to support people who have had a cancer diagnosis. And this is really just to show that, that nutrition is very important. In fact, in many cases it's as important, if not more important, than tobacco or smoking, which of course is definitely something that's very important. So here's anger. I think some people might feel that after a diagnosis, or frustration. And after a diagnosis, we find that it's sometimes very counterintuitive, that the way you might have eaten to prevent cancer may not be the way that you need to eat after you've had the diagnosis. And I think this is probably one of the most challenging and difficult topics for people to understand. But the key thing to remember is that you're probably going to need more protein. Almost all of the patients I see, once I've identified using bioimpedance analysis, which is a quick, painless, safe, non-invasive test we use, most people are not getting enough protein. And the reason that's important is fairly recently, we have a blog post about this, but sarcopenia is significant loss of muscle mass. And what has been shown is that when different chemotherapies, the reason there are two here is it was for different cancers. When they were given based on weight, but not on muscle mass, there was a tendency for toxicity. And it wasn't just the overweight people. It was also with people who were of a lower body weight. So it is an important concept. Probably the most common thing that people will say to me is, well, I'm not going to eat sugar now. I'm going to cut out all sugar. And in fact, that's not a bad choice, because mostly that means that they're going to eat more healthily, they're going to eat more vegetables, more whole grains, things like that. But some of the reasoning behind that may or may not be true for the particular cancer diagnosis that you have. It is true that there is a gene for a chemical messenger called insulin-like growth factor, which is overexpressed in many cancers. And once you secrete insulin, at the same time, the insulin-like growth factor is also upregulated. And it is very possible that those people who are insulin resistant may do better by cutting back on sugar. So let's talk about sugar a little bit. The first food that an infant has, whether it's breast milk or formula, is very sweet. It's actually, breast milk is one of the sweetest substances that we have. And it's about 8% of lactose. Cow's milk is actually only 6% lactose. But infant formula, fairly recently, has been identified as being 10%. So if we have infants that are not given breast milk or just given formula immediately, then they are liking a sweetness that's even sweeter than breast milk. Unfortunately, since the 1980s, we've become even more blunted to sweet flavors. And that was in the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. And whether, there's correlation, causation, we're not saying it's causation, but definitely since the introduction of high fructose corn syrup, it coincided with a global obesity epidemic. So added sugars are mostly the sugars that are added to beverages. They're not usually added to food so much as to the beverages, and this is where we've been consuming many more sugars. The reason we care about this is because of something called glycemic load or glycemic index. Glycemic index is talking about an individual food. We don't usually only eat one food. But to give you an example of how blood sugar goes up and then down or not as high up, there was a study done quite some years ago taking apple juice, the same amount of carbohydrate in apple sauce, and then a fresh apple. And if you take the exact same amount of carbohydrate in those three different forms, so a liquid or a puree or the apple with the skin and everything, what you saw was something very similar. This was the apple juice, this would have been the apple's sauce, and then a fresh apple would be down here. So it is important to get some fiber in whenever you're having carbohydrates. Hedonic is another word for pleasure. So we know that there is this triggering of the reward system, and chocolate is a unique substance depending on how expensive it is. If it's very expensive, it has been hardened and softened and then hardened and softened again. And the more often you do that, the more what happens when you put it in your mouth, it actually just melts. And that is almost unique in the food world. So because I love chocolate, and when you leave, there will be a little gift for you outside with a piece of chocolate, I thought I'd talk a little bit about chocolate and as an example of a food that we have emotions around. Interestingly, this has been associated with love and betrothal and marriage since the beginning, and is considered food or drink of the gods. Initially, it was, of course, a beverage, and it was quite spicy with cinnamon and spices and actually no sugar at all, and was considered a tonic. Interestingly, the Swiss consume quite a lot, 25 grams a day, whereas we consume about half that. And these products have about 300 flavonoids, which is a very large amount of flavonoids. Cocoa-derived flavonoids are very good as antioxidants, and also they're good at, for healthy platelet activity. So there's a lot of benefits. In fact, just yesterday I read one of those not very good studies that people jump all over, saying that people who ate chocolate once a week had a higher IQ. But that's one of those studies that you know there might be a problem with that one. And there are all these bioactive chemicals. By the way, that is joy. So all these different these emotions. The character in the movie Inside Out is called Riley, and these are her internal emotions that she feels as you go through the movie. And the idea is that we all have our own emotional characters inside of us. These are different chemicals that are all what you might call psychoactive. Now, this is, of course, everything that's good sometimes comes with a warning label. And this is something that I'm just drawing your attention to. You can go online to Consumer Lab and see the actual listing of the chocolates. And they're all over the place. But some chocolate sold in California does have more than the recommended amounts of, or tolerable amounts of cadmium and lead. And cadmium, of course, is a carcinogen at high doses, probably not in the amounts that you'd eat a small piece of chocolate. And lead, as we're finding out from Flint, Michigan, is definitely something that has a lot of problems with the nervous system, and again should be avoided by anyone who's going through treatment. However, here's the balance. The balance is that zinc, which is a very important nutrient, it's important for DNA integrity, DNA repair enzymes, immune system, and is found in high protein foods, so that's a good reason to be eating protein. It also is important because it balances out the possibility. So if you want your piece of chocolate, I would also make sure that you have a zinc-rich protein at the same time. And here are some food sources of zinc. And as you see, these are all mostly high-protein foods. So having discussed chocolate and emotional eating from that, why would we have an issue with eating anything we want to eat? Well, part of it may be because of treatment side effects. So I thought we'd go through some of these one by one and look at how we can make sure that these are in balance for your health. If you're feeling nauseated and improving appetite, these are some ways to help. Obviously, some of this is common sense. You know, prepare food in well-ventilated areas. You may want to not use metal silverware. You know, using plastic or bone might be better. And it's very important to make the food look appealing, because sometimes if you just put something from the microwave on a tray, it may just not look appealing, but you can just put a little garnish and it can make a big difference. Ginger is exceptionally safe. It is being given to pregnant women very safely. And one of the things, another plug for Reflections, we have essential oils in Reflections. And essential oil of ginger is a very useful thing to have if you have waves of nausea, because you can just unscrew the cap and put it under your nose, and that just helps. So you don't actually have to ingest anything. This is a little bit more about ginger and why it's a good thing to have. And the ginger can come in many ways. You know, you can have ginger tea, hard candies that are made with ginger. If food tastes or smells bad, so that's part of what happens with a lot of the treatments. It affects our taste buds. It affects the smell sensations. Some of this may be because of temporary lowering of zinc. Some of it may be because of not enough protein for the same reasons. But one of the taste receptor groups called umami, which is relatively new, it's similar to monosodium glutamate, but it's not. It's actually used in a lot of Asian dishes. And some people who are not familiar with, say, Thai food or Vietnamese food, when they're going through treatment, may actually find that that is quite pleasant. So this is another of the emotions. This is disgust. So sometimes things are really disgusting, and you remember that you had your favorite food the same day as chemotherapy. All of a sudden, that food isn't favorite anymore, and you're never going to like it again. So usually what we recommend is that you don't have your favorite foods within 24 hours of chemotherapy, because you will perhaps connect them. Reflux, very, very common for a lot of people, whether they do or don't have a cancer diagnosis. And of course, many of the chemotherapies irritate the stomach and cause an aggravation of that. The interesting thing, though, is that a lot of these foods are things that many people love and they want to eat: coffee, chocolate, things like that. And stress plays a huge role in this. You'll find people who say, oh, I went on vacation to Europe and I was eating all of the wrong things and I never had one episode of that. So, you know, I think that's because when you're on vacation, you're not stressed. So it's important to eat in a manner, you know, don't be watching the horrible 11 o'clock local news where things, you know, that's stressful. Okay, moving further down the digestive system, diarrhea is very common. Sometimes what happens is you have your chemotherapy and they're giving you the anti-nausea medicine, which maybe is a little constipating, and then maybe all of a sudden after that you have a little bit of diarrhea, or, you know, this can be an issue. But this is what's called the BRAT diet is fairly safe to use for a few days at a time. Or the other reverse, if you have the constipation, obviously these are old-fashioned ways to increase fiber, or prunes, prune juice, and then there are the things over the counter like stool softeners. Skin and hair, I mean, that's an important thing. And another thing for Reflections, we have wigs and scarves and things to help. And we also have an American Cancer Society Look Good, Feel Better that's at the center. Because the way you feel about yourself is a lot the way you present yourself. And if your skin is feeling very dry and your hair is thinning, here are some foods that can help a little bit. Now, this is a slide that I tend to show every time I speak, and I try to expand on it each time, because omega-6 and omega-3 are basically groups of fatty acids that are very important for our overall health. Omega-3 here, if you're a vegan and you don't want to eat fish, then we have to assume that your body is going to be making these 18-carbon long alpha-linolenic acid into the ones that are very important for the retina, for the kidney, and for the brain. And this may or may not be true. The good news is that now we have DHA that is from algae. So vegans can now make sure that they get enough DHA, because this is extremely important for brain health, for possibly for mood. The American Psychiatric Association recommends 1,000 units of EPA and DHA for everybody to prevent depression. These are, what's blue means it's essential. And the one that's pay attention to here is red meat, especially processed meats, meaning sausages, deli, most of the meat that comes from the deli. This is rich in arachidonic acid, which is sometimes will make pro-inflammatory messengers. This was probably not true in our grandparents' day. In our grandparents' day, the cows and the animals and the dairy was coming from grass-fed, and this is rich in this. But today, what we're doing with the animals is they are finished, meaning for the last 2 or 3 months of their life, they're eating corn. And corn is not what cows normally eat, and so they're laying down this fat that is actually quite harmful for us, which has increased the need for these omega-3s. I know that's a busy and complicated slide, but I think it's important to kind of get the concept of balance of why we need more omega-3s. Now, there are some foods that actually do have not just chocolate with the psychoactive compounds, but some other foods that can help with mood and calm down our sense if we're feeling anxious or agitated. Glycemic load, meaning it has fiber in it, and it's the glucose is going into your system more slowly. B vitamins are very important. Magnesium is very important too, although if you try to supplement with magnesium, you'll find that after about 400 milligrams, it's actually a laxative. So you have to be very careful with that. Going back to what type of eating personality you are, it's important to kind of know who you are. Self-knowledge can help you feel more in control of what's going on, especially when everything's kind of out of control. And also, you maybe want to look at some of the issues that may be relevant for you right now. Let's say you're undergoing some treatment that requires combining it with some steroids. Then you might want to be especially careful with salt and sugar because you're more sensitive to that. And also looking at your whole family medical history. You know, what are your family issues? Do you have a lot of diabetes in the family? Do you have cardiovascular disease? Do you have hypertension? All these things. Most people now would like to know what their glucose level is, whether it's fasting or immediately postprandial or after a meal. A1C, we see a lot about that in the drugstores because so many people have pre-diabetes, meaning that they may progress to diabetes. It's important to know these things because that way you can minimize your high glycemic load diet things and maybe cut way back on added sugars. This is a very good tool, the familyhistory.hss.gov. It's a secure tool, but you can actually download that data, put it either in the cloud or keep it on a thumb drive and share it with your healthcare team. And that is your family history and the relevant information. This is a slide that I'm going to show you twice. I'm going to show it to you now, and then we'll talk about it again afterwards. I get a lot of confusion about people who think that prebiotics or probiotics or digestive enzymes are prebiotics, and they're 3 separate things, but they're actually very involved together. Many people, when they have chemotherapy or radiation, but specifically chemotherapy and especially targeted therapies, their digestive system doesn't make as many or activate as many digestive enzymes. And that can affect the way you digest your food. It can mean that you get a little bit more gas, maybe more discomfort. Prebiotics are a way of feeding these healthy microbes. So we all know the word antibiotic, and of course that's anti, against, and a probiotic is for. And the new field of the microbiome is trying to understand more about that balance and which ones are good and which ones are not. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But these are 3 separate categories, but they're all interrelated. Our colon, or digestive system, is where we digest our food, and this is where prebiotics are very important. There's new terms called resistant starch. You're going to see a lot more of that in the food industry because there's a recognition that globally there are so many people who have an issue with prediabetes. Globally, if we look at the actual sugar consumption and high blood sugar levels, the United States is actually fourth in terms of numbers, but China and India and Brazil are number one. So we are going to be seeing a lot more about this. And resistant starch is a way to reduce the glycemic index of a food. So that if you have bread, say, that had, a few years ago, the whole grain breads had high fructose corn syrup in them. So they really weren't helping us. But today they maybe have resistant starch and perhaps a smaller quantity of honey in it. And these are just some ways to help support your healthy probiotics. Fermented foods are also very important. Miso contains 40 different species of probiotics. And there's a wonderful story about how they feel that the Great Wall of China was completely built because of people consuming probiotic-rich fermented foods, and it was giving them so much energy. Of course, being in England, I was brought up with Marmite. That's a fermented yeast extract. And if you come from Australia, Vegemite. And you can get people quite agitated about which is better. But and probiotics themselves, especially these patented, numbered ones, if you look on the back of a probiotic and it has numbers after it, that means it's patented and royalties being paid for the people who've actually identified them. And they do have a lot of activity. Of course, the fermented foods have activity, but these are particularly beneficial to people with specific issues, such as Culturelle has been shown to reduce diarrhea that's associated with 5-FU. This is available in the drugstore. Bifidus longum RO175 has been helped in reducing anxiety. I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago here at UCLA where they're doing a lot of research on the psychobiology of the microbiome and the effects that the bacteria are having on the brain. This is something that's very new, very interesting research. So what is the microbiome and why are we suddenly interested in it? What's going on? Part of it is because there was a new technique called 16S RNA, which was able to identify new species. And actually, it's turned everything upside down because now we're even identifying species we've never seen before which can now be taken out of the digestive system and cultured. This is an amazing robo-gut. If you go onto YouTube, you could watch this. This lady is I think she's from Australia originally, but she's up in Canada now. And this is the repopulation stage. And this is a really amazing project because, unfortunately, a lot of the research is being done in mice and rats. And mice and rats are not humans because they eat their poop and we don't. And so this is a much more accurate concept to try to mimic what's going on in the human colon. And there is this human microbiome project. Very interesting citizen science, as they're calling it, is a company called uBiome. It's actually microbiome. It's ubiome.com. They launched a short while ago, and the idea was that people would send swabs of their mouth, their vagina, or their poop. And they thought maybe just a few people would do that, but actually, literally, I think they're trying to get to 250,000. They've already got over 100,000. And many of these people are actually subscribing, so they're changing their diet, and then they're sending it in month by month to see how it's changing. So people are very interested in this whole field. And I encourage you to look look into it a little bit and see what's going on, because we're learning so much. It literally is an exponential way of understanding about genetics and genomics, because we have 100 times more genes in these microbial cells, and there's 10 times more microbial cells and 100 times more DNA and RNA. And there's a lot of crosstalk, and there's a lot going on. Here is recent Nature reviews, just looking at the different species and different in the nose and the lung and the skin, the intestine. This is just when we thought we understood the human genome, we're suddenly understanding the complexity of this. And it's really fascinating, but very challenging to understand. So going back to this trio, now I think perhaps you understand why this is so important. Digestive enzymes are also very important, because those are what break down the food into the particles that then the probiotics are able to use as nutrition and to provide us with the short-chain fatty acids, or these are chemicals that are even read directly by the brain. There's a lot that's going on. There are some naturally in different foods. Papaya, for example, has papain. Pineapple has bromelain. And papaya is actually a very soothing and easy to have food or beverage for anyone who's going through anything that's disturbing the digestive system. Some supplements that may be helpful actually include both fermented papaya and fermented wheat germ, because these actually support natural killer cells and immune health. And of course, a probiotic supplement maybe, but a targeted one, something that has direct benefit, as well as perhaps a fiber supplement, particularly if you don't like eating high fiber foods. So looking at it as a whole, anyone who's ever heard any of my talks, I kind of have put together a story of what I call the 3 A's. The 3 A's are antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, and anti-carcinogens. The idea being that when you have those in balance with who you are and what you're going through, then basically your health is good. And most of the foods that are rich in these 3 are also the foods that we're always looking at for general health. Berries are very, very healthful. I recommend everybody has at least 3/4 of a cup of blueberries, strawberries, raspberries mixed every day. It's exceptionally good for your nervous system and, of course, for a lot of other reasons. These are the 3 A's, and these 3 are what I call the 3 A's of DNA integrity. And these are all foods that are regularly talked about as being healthful. Curcumin. And that's, if you go on the internet and you put in nutrition and cancer, probably turmeric or curcumin is going to pop up right away. And curcumin is something that is bioactive within turmeric, and turmeric is a principle that is used in many Middle Eastern and Asian diets, and especially rich in curry powder. When you eat a little bit every day, it probably gives you some benefits, but in terms of actually looking at it as a supplement for activity, it's important to get it in a form that is actually absorbed, because most of it is not very well absorbed from the digestive tract, and is in health does not cross the blood-brain barrier. Another side effect that a lot of people complain about, and obviously it's something that we have whether you do or don't have a diagnosis of cancer, is fatigue. Just the way we live our lives today, you know, most people, there's a big focus now on getting quality sleep, because a lot of people don't get quality sleep, and then of course we are fatigued. And for some people looking for stimulants such as dark chocolate or green tea, that would be fine, but you also want to avoid having those after 3 or 4 in the afternoon if you have an issue with sleep. Hydration, staying well hydrated, that's very, very important. I think the average person probably does not get enough water, just plain regular water. It doesn't have to be expensive alkaline water or anything like that, but just getting regular water is very important. Getting electrolytes are also important, especially with certain chemotherapies. Taxol in particular can sometimes make people's electrolytes go off, and there's some very simple remedies for that. Detoxification is something we do every day, all day long, 24/7. It's not something you have to embark on as a separate program, and in fact, I would caution you about that, because a lot of people who do those, they usually got a lot of laxatives in them, and you can actually be quite sick if you're going to do that. But these are vegetables and foods that do support healthy detoxification on a regular basis. Two sets of vegetables that have particular healthy benefit in terms of liver and kidney detoxification are the garlic family and the cabbage family. And these are all vegetables with a lot of benefits. The cabbage family, kale was the sort of vegetable of the moment. I think cauliflower is the latest one, but they're all part of this same family. So Hippocrates way back said, as to diseases, make a habit of two things: to help, or at least do no harm. I feel that that is very, very important when we're looking at the whole field of nutrition, dietary supplements, and I just want to talk a little bit about some things that you probably should avoid. There are certain interactions that can take place between certain chemotherapies and some supplements. And just because somebody's telling you that this is the greatest thing and you've got to take it, and it may or may not be suitable for you, going back to what I said before about the diet for prevention may not be the same as the diet once you've had a diagnosis. So these are just a few interactions. This is a particularly important thing because so many of the newer targeted therapies go through this particular liver enzyme processing. It's called the cytochrome P450, CYP3A4, and about 50% of all pharmaceuticals pass through this liver enzyme. Most people heard about it because of Lipitor, the cholesterol stabilizing medicine. But the important part to know is that for up to 72 hours, this competition between certain foods, particularly grapefruit and bitter orange, it takes about 72 hours for the new enzymes to be synthesized. So this is not something to be taken lightly because you may be getting untoward side effects. Particularly, for example, this is just examples of some chemotherapies that are interacting with that. And these are probably having less of an effect, but nonetheless, those may also have an effect. Another thing that's very important are supplements of individual antioxidants. So going back to prevention, we know that foods that have a lot of antioxidant activity may be beneficial for people in preventing certain cancers, but after a diagnosis or even it may be that just individual beta-carotene, vitamin E, vitamin C may actually have counterintuitive effects. It's almost like the cancer cells use those antioxidants to protect them. And several studies had to be stopped because of that. So I feel like I'm giving you a lot of cautions. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. So what about what we should be doing, and how do we have nutrition to thrive? Fish is really a great choice. It's very easy to digest. All types of fish are very good choices. I usually give people a spreadsheet that talks about low mercury fish, because obviously you don't want to be adding to your burden of any toxins. But salmon is a great choice, of course. Even if it's farmed, it's still a great choice. Of course, wild is best. Fruit, especially berries. 2 or more vegetables. Now, that can be in a soup. A lot of ways it doesn't, or juiced. But when you juice, make sure you have all the fiber there as well. And herbs, curry, and spices. When you cook with these regularly, you get a small quantity, but probably what it's doing is over time, it's really helping as an anti-inflammatory and anti-carcinogen. And it's so important to think of food as your friend, not as your dietary restriction. these are just some concepts as what's important. I put the microbiota in the middle because I think the more we learn about the importance of the microbiome, the more we realize this is really central to health. What about other things apart from eating to manage stress? Well, here's just a few ideas. We teach some of these things at the center. We teach mindfulness. We have art therapy. Of course, music can be very beneficial for people. There's a wonderful harpist who plays in the auditorium, in the atrium here on Mondays at lunchtime, and it's so beautiful. The last one here is hot beverage. I don't know if any of you watch The Big Bang Theory, but Sheldon's very big on if anybody's got anything stressful, would you like a hot beverage? We offer Qigong classes, and activity and being active and being outside can make a big difference to your overall wellness. Mindfulness and meditation, these are ancient practices with very, of course, you know, there's nothing old, nothing new, but actually modifying some of these practices for the modern days is giving us a lot of benefits. I show this as a symbol of rejuvenation and spiritual health. The lotus is such a beautiful flower. It opens in the daytime and goes to sleep at night. This is my favorite quote from Albert Einstein. There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. And it's very profound. And these are all the characters inside Riley. And I do hope you'll have a chance to see the movie because it really is adorable. And then if you want some more ideas on how to be joyful, the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, which is their advocacy arm, has a project right now called Share Your Joy, and list of cancer patients, all the things that are bringing them joy. And there's some really very inspirational pictures and ideas, and you can add yours to it. So that's it.
High doses of vitamin C are to be avoided. Is 500 milligrams of vitamin C a problem?
Okay, the question is, I mentioned high doses of vitamin C to be avoided, and he was asking if 500 milligrams is considered a high dose. It's right on the edge of being a high dose. I don't think it is a high dose. Part of the issue is if you have larger doses than your body really needs, you're mostly just peeing it away. The other thing is that with 500 milligrams, you probably wouldn't get this issue. But if you were taking 6,000 or 7,000, which is what some people do, it's almost on the level of causing some loose stool, but not. You sort of taper it back. What can happen is, say you go away for the weekend or on a vacation and you forget to take your vitamin C, you can actually get something called rebound deficiency, which is really like scurvy. And so your body has become adapted to this higher dose. The other issue is if you take vitamin C is not a very efficient antioxidant. We as humans, and I think there's 2 other species, don't recycle it. Every other animal recycles vitamin C and uses it over and over, but we don't. So actually, the antioxidants that you get in things like berries or citrus are much more effective because they recycle themselves. So rather than taking 500 milligrams of vitamin C, I'd encourage you to have vitamin C-rich berries, citrus, vegetables, things that have a lot of vitamin C in them, because then you're also getting other antioxidants there, and they all recycle. They're synergistic, and they're much better for you. Okay? Yeah, the lady in front. Yeah. Huh?
It was mentioned that you have a service in the Sims Man Center to evaluate your nutrition, your personal nutrition. Could you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yes, thank you for asking about it. The question is about the service that we offer, Integrative Wellness Assessment. It's a service where you have an hour and a half with me, And what happens during that hour and a half is we begin usually with a body composition test. This is a test that's quick, painless, safe, non-invasive, but it's very informative. It will tell us how much lean mass you have. It will tell us if you're hydrated, and it would also help us to guide you in terms of choices of proteins and choices of foods so you get enough protein. I also go through your typical family history, look at different patterns of eating. Are there some issues for you that are unique for you? I'll look at your own diagnosis, some other medical records you may want to share. It is a highly personalized and precise way of helping you to optimize your health during this difficult time. I welcome family and friends who want to come. Sometimes people bring shopping bags full of supplements that they've got, and then what I can do is kind of sort it and say, yes, keep this one, maybe don't have this, maybe consolidate this, and no, toss that one out. So my goal is to be your guide, someone that can give you some background information. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, and I'll look it up. I like to be available so that when you've finished the session and you go home and your best friend calls you and says, you've got to do this, then you can email me and I will respond to you. So that's really what happens during this session. Some people I see regularly, but most people get a lot out of that session, so usually it's enough for them, and then they know that I'm there. You also get a packet that has about 15 different separate handouts talking about everything from the Mediterranean diet to different vegetables to sources of fiber, which is more general. And then you also have when you leave, you'll have recommendations that are personalized for you that I have written up. And also, if I recommend any supplements, I will write those out separately, explaining why and what you should take. And you also get a copy of my book, which is called the Cancer Nutrition Center Handbook. So I think people find it's pretty comprehensive, but it's also designed to be supporting you and lowering your anxiety about food and nutrition. Because showing that slide, we're showing 9 out of 10 people are stressed by this. That is my experience. People are really stressed by it. So my goal is to lower that stress and to come to an agreement within a family or loved ones so that everybody's on the same page. You know, maybe not everybody's in agreement, but we're all on the same page. That's the patient, you are the ones that's most important. Does that kind of answer your question? You can watch a video, I think, online from the center that will show you a little bit about what the body composition test looks like. Basically, we put electrode pads on the wrist and the foot, and we send a tiny signal from one point to the other. And then you get a 8 or 9 page color report that's very, very comprehensive. And then if your weight should change for any reason, we can do it again and make sure that you haven't lost muscle mass, because that's really important. Yeah, the lady next to you.
Because I've had a lot of patients who have seen Carolyn. The personalized part, I think, is very important because there's a lot of opportunity to ask questions. And I think each person who comes in with a different set of questions. And I think that's what, at least my patients have told me is really helpful, is that they get all this information from all kinds of sources, and having someone kind of be able to address and answer those questions in a personalized way. And also at different transitions of treatment. So if you're just starting treatment, if you're going to the surgery, if you're having a recurrence, if you're on chemotherapy, those are different points when your needs may be different and may need to be adjusted and personalized. So that's one of the things that I have found for my patients has been beneficial. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
Does flaxseed increase breast cancer risk or reduce breast cancer risk?
Oh, that's a great question. The question is about flaxseed. Does it increase or decrease breast cancer risk? That's a perfect question to explain the complexity of the microbiome. So flaxseed, if it's freshly ground, crushed, has some compounds in there that are then metabolized by the microbes that live in our colon. And some people have more or less of these things. And they may form a very potent plant estrogen. So let's say you have a type of breast cancer that's very strongly receptive to estrogen, then having 2 or 3 tablespoons of freshly ground flaxseed on your cereal in the morning may not be recommended. Whether people who've had flaxseed every day all their lives, it's kind of similar to soy, although soy is not quite as intense a phytoestrogen. But soy, similarly, depends to a certain extent on the microbes. Like there are people who make equal in their gut, and then there are people who don't. And the ones who do make the equal tend to benefit more than the ones who don't. So that's why the microbiome adds so much complexity to this topic. But flaxseed oil does not have that issue, and nor does soybean oil. So you could have the benefits of the omega-3 oil without having any risk of having the microbes making a potent phytoestrogen. Does that answer your question? I know it's a complicated topic, and I think there's been a lot of discussion of looking at soy as a preventative thing and then assuming that flax, because it's even more potent, must be even more preventative. And going back to the microbiome research, we know that a lot of this is dependent on what are called developmental windows. These are brief moments of time when we're very vulnerable to the outside world and the microbes are very vulnerable to their diet. And when you come in as a middle-aged person, those windows are way gone. The windows are when you're in utero, at 3 months of age, and at puberty. So it's already set. The whole thing with the microbiome is that it appears that the balance of these microbes is very unique and is very set at a very early age. And we don't know, nobody quite knows how long and how much you can change that. And it may be fairly immutable, or it may be changeable. We don't know. So we'll wait and see. Yes?
Question. Back in 2000, I spoke to residents about prostate cancer. And Michael Milken had inoperable prostate cancer.
Right.
A diet. Several cookbooks I'm aware of.
Yes.
And he did not have the operation. He's still alive and taking tests.
Right.
Is there any scientific proof that the diet does successfully prevent or at least maintain prostate cancer or any other types of cancer?
Wow, it's a great question. I feel like I need a lawyer because there's so much that went on with that. I think that probably, I'm not sure I know, to be honest. I really don't. I think that the whole story with pomegranates was very interesting. Pomegranates are a very rich source of antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogens, all of those 3 A's. There are some people who have a type of prostate cancer that will stay, and there's some people, once it escapes, it can be very aggressive. I know that he has spent an enormous amount of money and has a lot of people following the research that he's funded. But I'm not sure how much work he's done with the microbiome, and I think that would play an important role. But the sad thing, and we have to look at how much we have all lost because Steve Jobs thought that he could do everything with diet. And look what we all lost. And I just think each person's unique, each person's individual. We all make our choices. And my goal is to help people make a choice that's informed and a choice that they feel good about. And if Michael Milken feels good about what he's doing, and so far it's good, that's great. But in terms of objectively, do I think that that's the way everybody should be doing things? I really don't know. I don't want to say more than that.
I think that the thinking on prostate cancer has changed a lot also, and I would encourage you to look at one of our videos on prostate cancer, especially around the issues. You know, there was a lot of attention to PSA, there was a lot of surgeries being done, and the pendulum has been swinging back because there's been sort of this understanding that in fact many men will die with prostate cancer, but many men who have prostate cancer will not die from prostate cancer. And so while we can't comment on what's true of an individual person, I think that even the understanding of the disease over the period of time in which a lot of that was launched has shifted, and now there's much more observations and surveillance of men who have lower grade prostate cancer and not doing surgery and intervention. So I think that has worked and changed, and there's been a number of speakers specifically on prostate cancer to address that. And I can't remember if we've had prostate cancer this year. I don't think we have, but I think we have it coming up. I don't remember exactly when, but we have an inside brochure. Probably some of those issues will be able to have.
Yeah, real quick. I have prostate cancer, and my urologist said, eat smart, exercise, and stay away from stress. Is that kind of true? The question, actually, it's a comment saying that this gentleman's oncologist has said, eat smart, exercise, and stay away from stress. If we go back to the Venn diagram I have there with health in the middle, you know, basically you're dealing with reducing your stress and staying physically active and also getting good quality sleep. All the things that I think are very common sense. I think some of the issues are more like, why is that not happening? A lot of things happen to us in our life, in family life, in the world, you know, in our careers, everything which you don't expect, and how I think the whole concept of resilience comes in. You know, how do we do that? For some people, maybe for Michael Milken, you know, becoming really obsessed with diet became very important for him to balance that for him. So each of us is individual. What I was trying to show here was self-knowledge. Who are you? You know, what's important to you? What is food for you? And how can you work with that to build more resilience into your life? Whether, you know, you could have had any diagnosis and it would still be the same thing. I mean, you could say that for somebody who'd had a heart attack or somebody, anything. I think stress reduction is a huge challenge, because if you tell people lower your stress, often what happens is they become more stressed about the stress, you know, and they're stressed about lowering their stress. And then that's counterproductive. I think what's better is kind of building the resilience and going back to some of these ancient practices where people probably, in many ways, our lives we have very different stressors today. You know, we don't have the stressors of sudden, well, maybe we will in the future with Zika and stuff, but basically we're not living with childhood infections the way we used to live with them. We don't have, you know, here in Southern California right now, you know, we don't have imminent threats that mean that we have we have, you know, military conflicts, things like that. There's so much that we don't have, so sometimes we have different types of stress. But at the end of the day, it's still about who you are and how you deal with these stressors and how you learn as you live to become more resilient. But there isn't a single magical formula for everybody. I wish there was. Yeah, this lady here, yes.
Thank you for a great talk. I'm interested in knowing if you use genomics, if and how you use it to personalize nutritional or supplement advice even further.
Right. Well, it's a great question. The question is about, do I use personalized genomics to personalize it even further? Yes and no. I don't think it's quite ready for prime time yet, in large part because of the microbiome. I think that there's a lot of interest in integrating genomic data. There's a number of kind of, I'm not sure I would recommend companies that are doing limited tests and making recommendations based on that. I'm not even sure if we're ever going to really be able to home in on I mean, one of the areas, I was just recently at a conference in La Jolla on the future of genomic medicine. And one of the most thought-provoking areas for genomic medicine is people who appear to be healthy, who seem to have what in animal models would actually make them not survive. And yet these people are healthy. So we don't know. For example, we learned a lot about HIV when we learned about there are people who have a specific rare, very rare, but they are actually able to tolerate the virus because their body does not receive it. So this is, I think it's something where as we become more able to deal with big data, and it's not us as humans, it's probably going to be artificial intelligence that's doing this, plus what they're calling citizen scientists, which are basically you, me, everybody, putting it all together. I think that there will come up some very interesting and probably not what we expect results. And I think that that's the thing that's most interesting is, what we think, we tend to think very linearly. Well, this will lead to this, will lead to this. And I think it's way more complicated than that. And I don't know if I really answered you, but yeah, I mean, 23andMe is a very interesting company. And if any of you have had a chance to listen to the founder of that, she's a really interesting speaker. This organization, Microbiome, the ubiome.com, that's another very interesting citizen science. I mean, we're crowdsourcing information. And it's a very interesting time to be alive. And here in Southern California, we've got wonderful research institutes that are doing incredible work. Gene editing is on the horizon. I mean, it's a very exciting time. Did I answer your question, sort of? Yeah, the lady behind you.
Yeah, my question is about elevated carotene and the relationship of carotene and cancer, and then related, I think, tomatoes, canned versus fresh, and are they also loaded with carotene?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. Okay, so the question is about carotene, and wait a minute. It was about carotene. Was it? Is elevated carotene. Is elevated carotene associated with the incidence of cancer? And then about tomatoes, whether they should be fresh or. Okay, so I'll start with the second one and then go back to the carotenes. Tomatoes actually are rich in something called lycopene. And lycopene is not a direct carotene, but it's a carotene-like substance. There are lots and lots of different carotenes in nature. And they are normally an orange color, but sometimes they're masked by green, so you don't see it. There is some. If you eat a lot of carrots, your skin will turn an orange color, and it's not a jaundice orange, it's a different type of orange. And there has been some concern because some people do become quite orange. But in terms of whether it's actually linked to cancer, I don't think anyone's shown that. I'm not sure that it's preventing it either, but I don't think anyone's shown that it's actually can trigger cancer. The lycopene story came about, the cooked or fresh tomatoes came about from large-scale surveys of the way people eat. And in particular, they were looking at incidence of different types of cancers compared to the types of diet that people were eating. These are not very good studies because people don't usually tell you what they eat correctly. They usually leave out all the bits that you really would like to know about. But nonetheless, what did pop up was that people who had fresh tomatoes were at no particular health benefit, but the ones who were having cooked tomatoes, which was actually mostly in pizza or pasta sauce, had benefit. The way and ketchup, yes, but the way we've looked at it is that most of those people were probably eating culinary herbs such as oregano as well. And it's possible that the oregano or marjoram were actually more beneficial than the tomatoes. I did hear a gentleman who has a company in Israel called Lyco Red, which is tomato extract, speak at a conference where they were asking about prostate cancer and tomatoes and lycopene. And he was pointing out that lycopene is very fat-soluble and attracted to fat. And part of it is that the prostate is a very fatty organ, and that's why it may just get concentrated in the prostate, and it may have no particular relationship to the health or not. So I think we don't really know is the bottom line of that. We don't. But I don't think being orange is not an issue. No, don't worry about it. Yeah, the gentleman behind? No? Oh, yeah, right in the back.
There is something called microbiotic diet.
Yes.
Does that have something to do with this? With
the microbiome? No, actually, the question is about the macrobiotic diet. Macrobiotic diet is a program that started in Paris in the 1890s. And it was a weight loss program. And so it was kind of popular, especially in the 1960s and the hippie time. There are different levels of the macrobiotic diet, and there are different levels going up to only brown rice. And it was a big issue in the 60s because some people were very extreme and only eating brown rice, and some babies died because they were B12 deficient and protein deficient. This all kind of comes about when people talk about, can you starve cancer? So there are people who think if you go on a very strict, stringent program and you don't have too many calories and you don't have enough protein, maybe the cancer cells will be starved. Actually, it's the opposite. When you do that, your body's not able to fight back because you're not having the protein, you don't make the white cells, you don't have the immune response. And so, in general, we don't recommend that type of a program. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. The lady in, there's Elmer right here.
For patients who have compromised immune systems that have been altered from chemotherapies or targeted immunotherapies,
right.
Are probiotics recommended if they're missing parts of their immune system?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is about if you are immune compromised, should you be taking probiotics? There are some single patented strains of probiotics that actually may be very beneficial. There is, for example, one called VSL number 3, which has a very elegant, nice study showed that it benefited individuals who had pouchitis, which means that they had had a section of their colon removed and the pouch was getting infected, and this was preventing that. So these are targeted that are helping people whose immune system is there. I mean, probiotics on their own, the reason I showed you that trio twice is that the probiotics on their own are not going to really help much. You have to still have the environment for the probiotics to thrive. So for example, if you just had a diet that had no fiber, and no vegetables or fruits at all, or no grains, the probiotic balance would not, it's like they wouldn't thrive. They need a certain environment to be there. The types of probiotics that are beneficial are the ones that are helping without hindering they're not causing local inflammation. And part of the reason why people talk nowadays about going gluten-free, for example, is because there are certain foods that have what are called lectins in them, and lectins may stimulate an immune response locally, and then the result is that the digestive system becomes more porous, and some particles may cross into the bloodstream and generate an inflammatory response. And when your immune system is somewhat compromised, what we're really saying is that the lining, the barrier, may not be as intact. And that's why we have to be very careful to rebuild that. And that's a type of process that would take time. So I would say a targeted probiotic, but probably not a whole lot of just general things that you might go to the health food store and get, because we don't know what's in those. That wouldn't be a great idea. Did that answer your question? Kind of? Part of? Okay. Did you want another 20%?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do you think soy products and wheat are safe? And also whether there should be too much focus on organic versus non-organic protein, dairy, meat?
Right. Well, the question is, do I think that soy products and wheat or gluten-free, gluten-rich foods are safe? And actually, kind of going back to your question, there are certain foods that are more likely to trigger in individuals because we're all different. Some people can have these things and it's totally fine. It doesn't bother them at all. And then some people have. This is part of knowing who you are, and it's also part of knowing what your family history is. If you have a family history where a lot of people have diseases that end itis, meaning arthritis, gastritis, you name it, everything ending itis. Itis means inflamed. So if you have a lot of inflammation, it's possible that your body is overreacting to things. And theoretically, these could be passing across the digestive tract into the bloodstream and generating this autoimmune condition. So when you have foods in your diet that other people have described will have that effect, it's sometimes helpful to eliminate them or at least to rotate them. So basically, you might have something that your concern might trigger a response once every 3 days. Then that allows your body to get over it. If you never have it at all, you may overreact when you do see it. So we're seeing a lot of this with peanut allergy. The kids now being suggested, instead of taking them off completely and avoiding everything, they should have a very, very small amount and become desensitized. So are they safe? I think it's a matter of whether we're talking about somebody whose digestive system is very compromised, in which case it might not be the greatest idea, or somebody whose digestive system is actually fine, and then for them it would be okay. And as far as dairy and things like that, it's got more to do with the types of the way we're rearing the animals. And I do think that dairy products, it's worth buying organic, yes. And the irony is that we buy organic yogurt and milk, but there's almost no organic cheese even available. So everybody's eating regular cheese, which is just the same. Yeah, I think it is worth buying that. And then organic usually means that there's not a lot of pesticides on these things. I'm not saying not totally, and we have natural plants will make their own toxins, so it's not like you're completely avoiding that. But it usually means that you're eating a little bit more healthfully and you're more conscious of it. But if it's becoming that it's too everything you look at you're afraid of, then I think that the stress around the food is probably more harmful than the actual food itself, if you know what I'm saying. So, well, the meat that's reared in organic farms, usually they're more humanely reared. I think humanely reared is a big word. You know, when you're getting eggs, get them from humanely reared chickens. Humanely means that the people have actually cared a little bit. It's not just industrial output.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
I'd like to know your opinion of the ketogenic diet.
Okay, the question is about the ketogenic diet. So there are certain ways you can eat which overrides the way the body normally generates glucose. Your brain runs on glucose. That's its fuel. But there are ways to override that and generate, instead of glucose, ketones. This is how humans have survived long periods of famine. When food wasn't around, we were able to burn fat instead of carbohydrate as a fuel. Some people feel that this might be helpful in terms of lowering the availability of glucose to cancer cells. The ketogenic diet that has some science behind it is actually for a different purpose. There are children who have epilepsy or severe seizure disorder, and they may be missing much of their life because of these seizures. They can be fairly well controlled on a ketogenic diet, and sometimes I think it's only about 40% of kids. It's not everybody. But there are some that actually do seem to have fewer seizures and seem to benefit. In terms of adults, it is extremely difficult to restrict the amount of carbohydrate that you want to eat for emotional reasons. Most of us like foods that have carbohydrates in them. And so over the long term, it's very difficult to stay on a ketogenic diet. We also don't know what it's doing to the environment where the microbiome is thriving or not thriving. And unless you're adding a lot of vegetable fiber in there, you're probably long-term doing some harm. So it's a complicated topic. I know it's something that I'm speaking twice this week, Friday and Saturday, for people with primary brain tumors, and that is definitely a major topic that people ask. And I think it's a personal issue, how much you believe in it, and if you're really feeling that it might be of benefit, then, you know, it can be monitored. You have to have somebody watching you. You have to monitor your urine pH. It's not something to just undergo lightly, because most people find it very, very challenging to follow. Have you actually tried it, or are you just interested? Yeah, yeah. If you read about people who've tried it, most people find it's extremely difficult because you really can't eat out with anybody, because and it's taking away a lot of the pleasure of what you're eating. And I think that the science around its benefits is very limited, and what it is mostly, as I say, it's maybe 35, 38% of children who are on a very strict and very restricted diet because they don't have capacity to go out and buy food and do what they want. Some of them benefit to a small amount. Does that answer that? Okay.
I have a question with regards to estrogen receptive tumors. What kind of foods should you be avoiding, or what diets would be recommended in those conditions?
Okay, so the question is about estrogen receptor positive not breast cancer, just cancer that's sensitive to, breast cancer. The two foods that I normally recommend should be avoided are soy and flaxseed. And then I do have a handout I give to people as a long list of foods that actually have the effect of lowering plasma estrogen. And most of those are fruits and vegetables, probably, that were listed here. There is a database that you can search for at the US Department of Agriculture on phytoestrogens. And there you can see the list of different foods and the concentration. One of the highest concentrations is something that's sometimes sold as a supplement, but we don't eat it, which is red clover. But we don't eat red clover, but that's a supplement. Garbanzo beans actually have a fair amount of phytoestrogens too, but you'd have to eat an awful lot of them. I think that flaxseed is the one that has more possibility for being an issue because of the individual, those who convert it to a very potent plant estrogen. There aren't a lot of foods. I mean, usually when people go through menopause naturally, and they get a lot of hot flashes, insomnia, things like that, they're looking for those foods that might minimize it. But very few of those foods have much in them. And then there's a couple of supplements like black cohosh that may possibly affect the brain regulation of estrogen production. Well, you know, the issue with dairy is it's coming from a mammary gland. And it depends on who I'm talking to. But I do think that if you have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, it makes logical sense to have very little dairy, if any. But that's just logic. I'm not saying, you know, and especially because some of these cows are fed antibiotics or basically a diet that's stimulating milk production. So you're stimulating cells in the mammary gland. Yeah, I mean, it's more logic than actual science. And then sometimes, because it's a really very small thing to do, then people could feel more in control, that they're actually doing something proactive, and that has a positive benefit, because then you're feeling less stressed about what's going on. But not every breast cancer patient would I say that to. It's just that if you're concerned about it, I think it's and that again is your choice. You know, then you might decide, well, maybe that's true, but I'm going to have some organic dairy because I like dairy, and that's fine. That's your choice. Yes, in the back.
Can I ask you, what's your suggestion about leftovers? Leftover food?
Okay.
Cooked food?
Yes. Yes. What you mean, is it the question about leftover food? What's my
Any days
opinion?
can you...
Well, the main thing is to be sure that you know, if it's coming from a restaurant, that you refrigerate it very quickly and that you fully heat it. Because the issue is you don't know how clean the hands were of the person who was preparing it. And so, you know, it's got more to do with minimizing possible upset stomach from having something that's left over. But in terms of its nutritional value, it's probably pretty similar. You know, as long as it's fully reheated, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Which sources of protein come from the chemo? You said most people are low in protein.
Yes, well, the types of proteins that, you know, usually I recommend for people, number one is fish. I think fish is a really good source, but also could be poultry. Dark meat of chicken or turkey has a lot more minerals than the breast. Preferably, if you can afford it. There are combinations of a grain and a bean that will make a perfect protein, and some people like to make a smoothie. So you basically take something that's, say, rice and pea. That's a grain, rice, and pea is a legume or bean. You put those two together, and you can make a smoothie, mix it with some fruit, and then you've got probably 20, 30 grams right there. And then other sources of protein, it would depend. I mean, if you're having dairy, then things like Greek yogurt or cottage cheese is a good source of protein. Almond milk it depends. If it's sweetened, it can be very sweet. You've got to look on the label. Some of the sweetened almond milks have got like 18, 19 grams of sugar in them, which is, you know, comparable to a a fruit juice. I think in terms of protein, some people don't need a huge amount, and some people just do need a huge amount. And when they need a huge amount, usually they need to boost it with a smoothie where you're actually getting a protein that's partially digested. Hemp is another protein that you can get, hemp protein. And whey. I mean, whey is actually a very good protein. Well, GMOs are basically in everything. I mean, there's no soy that isn't GMO. I mean, genetically modified is in our culture. It's there. Even places like some of the Hawaiian Islands that try to say this is not GMO because of the wind and the dust, things are there. I think that horse has left the barn. I really do. It would be nice if we knew it, but I don't think you. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily harmful.
Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, organic, yeah.
We're going to take, we'll take 2 last questions and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay. The lady in dark blue?
Yeah, these 2 questions.
Yes. Vitamin D? Well, there's vitamin D that we make in our skin from the action of sunlight. And then there's vitamin D in food. Most of the vitamin D in food is from fortified foods because most foods don't contain much vitamin D. What's happened fairly recently is that we've recognized that a large number of people, we don't even know how big a number, have very low vitamin D blood levels. So now, one of the proactive things you can do is ask your primary care doctor, please measure my vitamin D so I can see. Because if your vitamin D is quite low, you may need to take a supplement to bring it up. This is something that's been discovered recently because we know that people whose vitamin D is adequate do much better going through cancer treatment and their outcome is better. We don't know if it's cause or effect, but we do know that breast cancer patients who have a low vitamin D don't do as well as those who have an adequate or optimal level. But sometimes you have to take quite a lot of vitamin D to get it up, but you don't just want to start taking supplements without knowing what yours is first. Okay? Yeah. The lady in dark blue? Yes?
What about B12 injections? I've been getting them to help with my energy.
Right.
And the nurse practitioner will not put in B6, but she says that's an issue with breast cancer.
Yeah, I mean, B12 has, for a long time, nobody's quite sure why people feel a boost of energy with it, but some people do. Part of it is that as we age, we don't make as much stomach acid. And then, of course, if you're having many of the treatments, they put an antacid in there, or they recommend you take antacids. So over a certain amount of time, it may be that you are mildly B12 deficient. Again, a blood test will tell you. So this is another thing where it's worth taking a blood test, because if your B12 is above normal, usually that means people are taking a daily multivitamin and they're absorbing it. But if your B12 is low, then you may benefit from a shot, or you can take it under the tongue. It's a little slower to do it that way, but it does work because it goes in that way. The B6 story, I haven't heard that that's necessarily the case. But when you're taking anything that doesn't go through the digestive tract, it's not a physiologically normal way to be having it. So that's why you should always confer with your medical team before doing that. I know there are some diet programs where they give you B12 and B6 shots, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right way to go. Always check with your primary care. That's what they're there for. Okay. I'll wait a little bit afterwards if you want to ask me one-on-one, but I think probably our time is up. It's now 9 o'clock, so thank you.